Hi, everybody, and welcome to Your City, Your County. We're very pleased today to have two guests with us. First of all, we have Chuck Wagner. Chuck is the chairman of the Land and Water Committee of the Kewaunee County Board of Supervisors. Chuck, very nice to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
And also with us today is Davina Boness, and she's the county conservationist and head of the Land and Water Department for the county of
Thanks
Kewaunee.
for having us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for coming, both of you. Chuck, let's get started with you a little bit. How is the groundwater situation looking in Kewaunee County?
Well, I would say that I think it's looking better. And the reason I say that is because there are so many things happening on the ground that are real positives, I believe. We've never had this much cover crops, this many fields under tillage or with no tillage, and so they're planting it with no-till planting equipment. They're starting to apply manure during the growing seasons, during the middle of the summer, instead of just in the spring and in the fall, which are very important, I think, to apply the nutrients when the plants are growing so that they can utilize those nutrients as quickly as possible, prevent them from getting down in the groundwater in the first place. So.
Okay. Now, when you talk about the tilling and so on, I'm going to be the first to admit I'm not an expert. You know, I'm from the big city, okay? Kind of try and explain it to me a little bit,
Okay.
more of what they're trying to do.
Well, the old practice many years ago was when a farmer would take the crops off the field in the fall of the year, the next thing they did was they would apply a lot of manure to the ground, and then if they could yet, they would still try to plow the field, either chisel plowing or moldboard plowing and turning the soil over. And that really didn't give the manure any place to go, but sitting there in that wet, cold soil in the fall of the year. And so it had more of a chance of running off, so the ground would freeze in the winter, and a lot of times manure was yet put on the ground in the wintertime. And so there have been a number of things that have happened in here in the county, especially. We've got an ordinance now that was put in place 4 years ago, which has helped the farmers quite a bit, and I believe also helping the groundwater, and they're not allowed to apply liquid manure on any soil less than 20 feet to bedrock from January 1st to April 15th, which really, I believe, helps a lot of that. So that was the process years ago. Now, what we're encouraging farmers to do is to plant a cover crop. So as soon as you take off your soybeans or your corn off your field in the fall, you go back out there right away and no-till planting. Don't till the soil in any way, shape, or form, and use a direct seeding machine which puts the seed down into that soil.
Okay.
And plant something like of a cover crop, either a winter barley, winter rye, winter wheat. There's a number of other things that can be planted, different soil mixtures. And so then that goes into the soil and grows down in the ground, and that can hold the nutrients that are in there. Then through the winter, that crop the following spring usually dies or gets sprayed to kill it off, and then they can apply some manure to the ground and direct seed again, plant the new crop right into that old residue. What that residue does is it holds onto the soil, keeping it from washing away and running off into streams and ditches and then eventually into our rivers, which also gets into our groundwater, or it can run off and get into what we have our cracks in the bedrock, all of these fissures that we have with our bedrock. And so preventing that runoff from happening, and it can get into those sinkholes, which goes directly down into the groundwater aquifer. And so those are good things.
Okay. So when we talk about winter wheat and the other winter items that you mentioned, that's nothing that you'd harvest in the spring. You just plant it there to kind of cover the ground.
Correct. It covers the ground, it holds the soil, keeps everything, the nutrients in place. Any nutrients that are left there that weren't used up by the crop during the summertime usually are used by that crop. These are lesser expensive grains. They're a little less expensive, but the big savings for the farmer is not having to spend all of that fuel doing all of that tillage that they had been doing.
Okay.
So they make fewer passes over the ground.
Okay. So the point is we're going to plant this rather than digging up the ground.
Yes.
Okay.
Let the roots of the plants go down and loosen up the soil. And what it's known as is soil health. And that if they can make the soil healthier, the healthier soil will do a better job of handling the nutrients. It'll do a better job of recycling those nutrients and breaking them down into something the plants can utilize. And so those are all good things.
For somebody who didn't grow up on a farm, that really tells me a lot that I didn't realize, you know. Anyway, thank you. And I'm sure you guys could educate me for days here, you know, because I really need it. Davina, we've talked about some of the new regulations and those things that are coming into the county. What is the county, I shouldn't say forcing, what are their rules? What are their regulations?
Yeah.
How is it affecting you and the farmers?
Yeah, so like Chuck mentioned, we had our groundwater protection and public health and groundwater protection ordinance that was done 4 years ago. So that was something new to the county where it went above state rules. So, you know, we had the county board approve it, it went on ballot, and the voters voted by like 83% that we wanted this because we needed to protect our groundwater. So that, as Chuck referred to, is no waste of any sort, liquid or solid, from January 1st through April 15th. So it helped us because that's the snow melt, the big spring rains where we are seeing the highest amount of groundwater contamination events. So that really helped. By not having it on the surface, you're not going to be pushing it with the rain to the groundwater. Now, it did impact farms because they now had to build storage so that they weren't spreading during that time. Thankfully, we have state, federal, and local grants. State, federal, and local. That we can supply 70% cost sharing. So our staff actually does a lot of the engineering for manure storages, barnyards. So this was our first year where we didn't have any variances. So it's going really great. The second big one is the new NR 151 Silurian dolomite. So the regular NR 151 rules are a blanket. They cover the entire state of Wisconsin. We were the first geo region, so our geo region from Door County all the way down to like Racine-ish is the Silurian dolomite. That's the bedrock geology that we are over.
So that's what you have to work with that's there
The
naturally.
cracks, the fissures, the sinkholes, you know, the shallow bedrock, you know, up where Chuck lives, there's inches of soil before it hits bedrock. So you think of bricks standing up on each other, and if you pour water over them, it's going to go right to the groundwater, other than having a secure amount of clay to filter all those nutrients out. So we have stricter regulations. We just adopted them locally last September. So we're working with the farms right now to start implementing them. No manure on 0 to 2 feet for any farm. And that is something very new to all of our counties. So we're working on that. And like Chuck said, there's different rules to planting. There's different rules for applying manure at different times. So our office has a really good reputation with the farms. We respect the farms. We work with them because anything that we need to do to protect groundwater, the farms are going to be the ones that are implementing it. So we have a really great relationship on working to implement these rules.
Okay. Now, do most of the farms now that have been required to go by these new rules that are about 4 years old, do all of them pretty much have places that they store the manure, or do they take it to like a neighbor's farm?
No, most of them, I would say at least 95% of them have their own storage of some sort. Or else they have stacking locations that meet our different criteria for being able to stack manure on the landscape. But up in the Red River, Lincoln, our really shallow townships, they have their own storage.
Okay, very good. Well, it sounds like that's moving along pretty well. We do hear a lot about, and I'm going to get back to you on this one, Chuck. I think we hear a lot about the water in the streams, you know, and we want to be sure that it's clean, and we want to see how much water is actually coming down the streams and so on. What's the status of that? I know that Representative Kitchens has been primary in some of those aspects of trying to be sure that the water quality is good and the water flow is good. How's that going?
Well, we're in the middle, or getting to the latter part of the first year or so, a year and a half of the TMDL. It's a total maximum daily load, is what the TMDL stands for. It's a project along the lake shore. We're not just the only county. There's a number of other counties along the lake shore that are in this project right now. And what they're currently doing is monitoring the rivers and keeping it to Kewaunee County, the Yanapee, the Kewaunee River, and the East Twin River in the southern part of the county. So they're monitoring the flow of the river, they're monitoring the sediments that are flowing in the river, and they're also trying to monitor the phosphorus and nitrogen or nitrates that are in the water. And so that first phase of that project will be done this November, and then it will take them about a year to put together all of the data that they've accumulated over the past year and a half or so. And then it will tell them a lot of things about what the flows are, what if the sediments are increasing or decreasing at certain times of the year. And this should give them a good handle, and then they can make recommendations as to what we feel we should be doing to change some of these things. Because currently, right now, all of those rivers are on the impaired waterway list for the state of Wisconsin and the EPA, and because they flow into federal water, the Lake Michigan. And so what we're trying to do is see what we can do to fix that. Now, a lot of these things that I spoke about previous, the no-till planting, the cover crops that are applied, prevents a lot of runoff, and that is very key. I think that's probably one of the key things. Preventing the runoff from hitting the ditches and going down a ditch and then eventually hitting a small stream that feeds into the rivers. I think those are very important keys. So, but it's hard to say what project you should put where until you have good data.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, that's what we're trying to study, and that's what that TMDL is going to do, is going to give us some really good data to find out in different parts of the rivers. Some places there's more pollutants hitting it than others. Well, should we key in on that specific area along that river, looking at the fields, looking at the cropping practices, looking at the manure application practices, work more closely with those operators in those areas. So I think those will be key things to try to improve that.
Okay, and I know I've worked up I haven't, I've been on the board for Crossroads at Big Creek, which is up in Door County. And I know there was a great deal of concern up there some years ago that some of the beaches were becoming polluted. And of course, that's a major thing for the tourism industry, and it can certainly affect not only Door County, but Kewaunee County, Manitowoc County, you name it. And as I recall, they went out and we had kids there from, or students rather, from UW Whitewater who came up and did a lot of research, and they found out that a lot of this wasn't what we thought originally was, the pollution coming up from from Chicago or something like that, and they found that it was really a lot of the stuff that was, in the county. So I know as far as the beaches go, they planted a lot of grass, I guess. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
I know they've done they've done restorations where the water coming into the beaches, you'll plant some prairie grasses. We've done that in a couple lakes around here. But ultimately, you're going to have the phosphorus blooms if, like Chuck said, if you're not keeping the soil on the land. The nutrients are bound to that soil. So the algae blooms that you're experiencing at these different beaches, and we have the same issue in Algoma and Kewaunee, are the big algae blooms. So what we're trying to do with this TMDL is we're looking at all of our nutrient management plans, and we're breaking it down to small watersheds within those big watersheds to try to figure out how much nutrients are coming from these little watersheds. And that's not just farms. It's from any lawn that has no dandelions. I mean, what are you spraying on those lawns? That's all being washed out to any of our golf courses, or anything from those septic systems. It's all together, and it's all contributing to those algae blooms. So that's part of the TMDL, is identifying everything in those small little watersheds, so that when we know what's in the water, what's on the watershed, then we can start playing with different practices on the land and seeing how that influences the water quality.
And remind us again, what is TMDL? What
That's
is
a
this?
total maximum daily load.
Okay.
So it's a
Okay.
large project that is funded by, I believe, the DNR.
Makes me feel better about my yard because I have all kinds of dandelions growing there. And I have a neighbor on one side that I'm sure would prefer not to have so many dandelions around, and the neighbor on the other side is very much into nature, and
Yeah.
so he's, he just lets things go naturally. and
Dandelions
so-
are very important. They're one of the first flowers that come out and are very important to our bee habitat.
Yeah, good.
Right.
That,
Yep.
Well, I'm helping the bees then, and I
Yeah,
feel
see?
much, much better about that. Thank you. I remember going up to some of the beaches in, particularly like in Door County, because that's kind of where I spent my childhood, and digging down, and the odors that you'd get from digging into the sand were not good. And we were never quite sure where that was from, but now I think I have a little better idea that maybe I shouldn't have been digging in the sand as much.
You're still alive, so it's
I made it, yes, but you thought, boy, that's got a strange odor to it. Chuck, you were mentioning before we came on to do this program about an agrometer.
Yes.
What's an agrometer?
Well, I've not personally seen one.
Okay.
But just today, as I understand it, the Kinnard Farms, there was a demonstration, or at least they had this agrometer, which is a very large tractor looking. To me, it looked very similar to the type of machine they use for spraying different things on the crops, spraying Roundup or whatever. It's a very high-wheeled machine, so it can drive down the rows of corn without running over the corn, but it can drive right between, and the wheels are
That
very
could be
high.
important,
Yes.
yes.
But this particular machine has a lot of different nozzles that come off of these arms, and it's made for distributing manure. And they could distribute the manure right down at the ground level, right next to the base of the plant. And they can do it during the growing season. And as I said before, this is extremely important to apply these nutrients to the ground when the plant is growing, so that the plant can utilize those nutrients very quickly, right after they're applied. Applying the nutrients early in the year, the plant uses them at first, but then it gives too much of a chance for runoff if you get heavy rains and that sort of thing. So it's nice to have pieces of equipment, and it's great to see the farming communities that are looking at this stuff. They're trying extremely hard to come up with new and innovative ideas for applying that manure at a better time of the year, so that they have less runoff. So that agrometer was very interesting. It's the only one I understand that's in the country. Okay. So it's kind of interesting that they had it here. I had heard about a similar machine in the Fox Valley about 2 years ago, that a farmer actually was toying with his equipment and playing with it and trying to come up with a way to apply manure during the summertime to his corn crop. So.
So if you see this strange device
Yes.
with these things coming off the side, it's probably an agrometer.
Yes.
Okay, and that takes me back, looking back at history, I think. I remember, reading about the Pilgrims when they first came, and how the Indians or the Native Americans would help them, and they'd say, well, you put a fish, down into the ground by the corn you're trying to grow. This is kind of very similar in a more of a mechanized way, but
Sure.
but it's you look back in history, they knew that,
Yep.
back that far.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's a good thing. And what other improvements do you see taking place generally as far as the water conditions go? And any examples you could give would be good.
Well, specifically, and this is personal, it's my own well. After I built my house in 1996, and 4 years later, the well that I had at the time started to go bad. And I fought with it and tried to do a lot of different things on the land around my well, or on my acreage. I live on 79 acres, so I had some control over at least the land there, and made some changes, and there was no more cropping done. I had planted trees, left the vegetation grow, things of that sort. But after 13 years of fighting that well, I gave up on it, so we capped it, sealed it, and drilled a brand new well. And that one only lasted 15 months.
Oh, no.
And then the nitrates started to creep up. And so I was extremely disappointed, of course, after spending all that money to drill a brand new well. And so I've been testing it every 6 months now, and last October I tested it and the nitrate level was 15.8, and the bacteria showed up in the well for the first time. But through this past winter, and I tested it again right in the middle of the heaviest melting with all of that snow melt, the worst possible time. The recharge of the groundwater system was going hot and heavy at that time. Water was going down into the ground. So I tested the well that time, and the nitrate level was 4 parts per million.
Wow.
And the bacteria was gone.
No
And so
kidding.
I contacted Dr. Borkart, who was one of the leaders of the study that was done in Kewaunee County, and discussed this with him. And he said, well, that's a great thing, and it is. But hopefully what they're doing on the ground in my area with all the cover crops, and that's where I'm so optimistic about that. I have no way of proving that what was specifically done on the next door neighbor, or if it was 5 miles away, because we don't know.
Because the groundwater moves around a lot.
Yes, it comes from a lot of places, so it's very hard to follow that, and so I can't really prove it, but I'm very optimistic that all of the cover crops and the no-till plantings that have been done in our area up there has really helped. And so I'm going to keep monitoring this every 6 months, as I said before. But I'm very optimistic that good things are coming.
That's
and
very
happening.
good, yes. It seems as though, and I sell real estate, so one of the things that we always test for is nitrates, because of the fact that animals, give those off pretty much. Some of the other things we'll look for in groundwater, of course, are arsenic and lead, which would have come from orchards. Do we have regulations for those as well, or are we more working on the nitrate part of it?
Lead and arsenic they all have an EPA limit, or a state limit.
Right.
We don't have very many contaminations contaminated wells from those. It's mainly the E. coli bacteria, the nitrates, that we focus on.
Yeah, and coliform, where does that come from?
Coliform is on this table. Coliform is in
Right here.
Yeah. Coliform is all over. So coliform bacteria is not harmful, but it's an indicator that something else is getting into your well.
Okay.
So if you have a coliform like Chuck has, then you may want to test for more things. Coliform E. coli. If you have coliform, then it's automatically tested for E. coli. E. coli can make you very, very sick. E. coli is fecal matter from humans or animals. And then the nitrates, and we want to stay below the 10 parts per million, which is the state standard for nitrates.
Do you find that, and I know some of those smaller communities in the county areas have gone to wastewater treatment plants. Not too many in Kewaunee County. I know a few
Right.
have. A few more have in Door County. Does that make quite a difference too?
Yeah, when your septic's going to a wastewater treatment plant and it's being treated there and not through a septic system, because even a septic system has a discharge area, and that discharge area, I think it's about 25 pounds of nitrate or nitrogen per year. So they are discharging from those filter beds, and if
Okay.
you're getting more rain on one day versus another day, you're going to have a higher leaching rate from that.
Sure, but they still have to get rid of it too, just like
Correct.
anybody else would.
Yep.
I've heard, and I'm going to throw this out to both of you, that more people are coming to Kewaunee County to find out what you guys are doing. That's right here. And I think that's a real feather in your caps for this.
Yes.
How do you
Yes,
feel
it is.
about
I mean,
is that good?
I mean, Davina gets a lot of phone calls all the time from different counties around the state. How did you guys manage to put into effect your groundwater protection ordinance? Or how did you go about codifying your, the 151 changes that were made? And there's other areas of the state that are trying to get similar protections from some of those things. And so I have been asked, and I've traveled to different counties and talked with other people from other counties. I'm involved in a couple of other state committees, so I have the opportunity to talk with other county conservationists, as Davina's position, from other counties. Davina gets asked when we go to different conventions and things, and there have been some other things that we've done at certain conventions. There's been talks that we've given. But I believe one of the warmest feelings I ever had, one of the proudest moments I've ever had about Kewaunee County was this past April 2nd, when Davina and myself went down to the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection to put forth before that the Land and Water Conservation Board the latest Land and Water Resource Management Plan for Kewaunee County, which Davina and her department, as well as so many other people in this county. And it wasn't just Davina, and wasn't just her department, but we had a lot of citizens, people that don't live on farms, we had farmers, we had agronomists, we had crop consultants, and we also had manure applicator people that all came into the room and worked on that new Land and Water Resource Management Plan. It's a 10-year plan. Every county in the state has to have one of those plans. Years ago, I used to sit on that board. I sat on that board for 10 years approving these plans. And to sit there and listen to the accolades that came from the members of that board, and they were talking about how Kewaunee County is the shining star of the state of Wisconsin as to how they brought people together, and how we've been able to work to get some of these ordinances that we have in place, and how we've gotten the buy-in from the farmers and the crop consultants and the manure applicator people. They've all come together, and we may not be satisfying everybody all the time, but at least we're bringing people together and trying to work on these things together, because that's so important. If we don't work on these problems, if we just sit back and point fingers and yell at each other, we're not going to go anywhere. We need to work together.
Yeah.
And so that's so important. And to hear the people down there in Madison say those things about our department, that was really nice. It was really special.
Yes. Davina, I would imagine you feel the same way.
Yeah, and I get reached, a lot of counties call me, staff members, county board members, land conservation committee members, and where we are, they are where we are 10 years ago, where we knew we had an issue, and it was all hearsay. Well, yeah, the water turns brown in spring. Well, where? Why? How bad is it?
Yeah.
So we started documenting, and we really started, pushing our well testing programs, which are all voluntary. All the results are confidential. I'm actually the only one in the county that knows all the results.
Ooh.
Now our LCC doesn't know. My other staff members don't know. I do a lot of my own research too. I do Lincoln research, where I test 25 wells twice a year to look for trend analysis. I've partnered with Dr. Mark Borkhardt on his research that he's been doing. And we started documenting all this, and then we started to implement the blanket regulations of NR 151. We really started to document. And that's where I'm telling everyone that they have to do. And they don't really want to do those 10 years, but it takes a long time to document and know, okay, state of Wisconsin, here's our well testing results. Here is our implementation of the current rules. It's not working. We need the new rules. And I sat on the board to write those new rules, and It was because our entire area, and that includes Dorr, Brown, Calumet, Manitowoc, the 5 of us counties really work a lot together, could all show the state that we implemented your rules, they're not strong enough, we need new ones because here's our water quality data. So that's what like the Southwest Central Sands, that's what they're starting to do right now is document their problems.
Is Wisconsin a leader in resolving these, or are other states getting into it too, do you know?
There's a lot of other states that have different programs. I don't know the extent of their water quality. I've presented with Dr. Mark Borkhardt down in Iowa, and they have a very small region of karst topography, kind of similar to our Silurian, and they have a lot of contaminant problems. I think they are heavily, not with the CAFOs or with the dairy, but with the hog corporations. So we went down there, I think 2 years ago, and presented at the college down there, and I gave how we did the whole process, and then he, Dr. Mark Borkhardt did what he found. So we've been kind of going around traveling and educating. I speak at a lot of conferences.
Well, that's
so usually I pull Chuck with me.
great. Two of you guys get wrapped up in this.
Yeah, but it's like Chuck said, it's all about partnerships.
Okay.
We work really good with the farmers, and those are the ones that we need to implement. Our office has never had the really heavy stick, even though back in September we do now have the opportunity and the ability to do citations. And we did citations last fall because we needed to. But we work with them. The farmers are really having a tough time right now with the economy.
Oh, sure.
And simple things like nutrient management plans are too expensive for some farms. So what we're doing is I have staff members that hold teaching seminars to teach farmers how to write their own plans. And that saves them money because we get some grants from the Department of Agriculture to write these or to give these sessions. And so the farmers see that we're helping them as much as we possibly can. And some counties just want to do the heavy hammer, and we like that partnership.
Yeah.
And that's where Chuck also talked about, we have the 3 demonstration farms in Kewaunee County. We have the Peninsula Pride Farms in Kewaunee County, where we're all members and partnerships with. So we're doing a lot of great things here, which other counties and the state of Wisconsin are noticing.
Yeah. In talking with people from the police department, from the education department, from agriculture, from clean water, it seems as though Kewaunee has always been or Kewaunee County has always been trying to be helpful rather than beating somebody on the head, to enforce the regulations.
Well, and you have to have some of the beatings occur.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Occasionally.
But ultimately, how we did a lot of this was like Chuck said, we all got at the same table. Every group of people, we did have, we had people that petitioned the EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act to get clean water. And that was one of the big triggers that really helped get attention to Kewaunee County. And maybe it was negative attention, but that negative attention was needed because we needed to spotlight that we had an issue. And then we were able to move forward with those agencies, with the petitioners, with the farms, with all the diversified groups. We had DNR work groups. We had 5 work groups. I went to so many meetings in my first couple of years as a county conservationist. I don't even know if I knew my husband that year. But bringing us all together and getting mad and getting angry and then saying, okay, this is why. Because we finally listened to each other. We got really good rules, and we ultimately got new state rules. So,
how many years have you been the conservationist?
It'll be 5 in October. But before that, I've never left Kewaunee County Land and Water. I was an intern for 1.5 years, and then we had a technician that was retiring. So I was an intern for 1.5 years. I was the water quality specialist for 10 years. Then I got promoted to county conservationist.
Wow, you don't look that old. That's a good thing.
She started right out of college and worked her way up.
Okay, all right. I was going to say maybe when she was 10 she began. I don't know.
Aw.
Well, how many employees do you have?
Well, this year we actually were merged with the zoning office, so we took those duties over, which we have township zoning, so we don't do a lot of zoning in Kewaunee County unless it's along the shoreline. So we have 7 now.
Okay.
So
You got some good helpers.
I have an excellent staff.
That's great.
Excellent staff.
That's very good.
They are the reason people tell me I'm as good as I am at my job, because
Yeah.
I have
It helps to
I have an
good
army
help.
behind me that are
Yes,
amazing. So
That's great.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, we've about come to the end of the half-hour show here, and I sure want to thank both of you. We've been speaking with Davina Bones, who is the county conservationist and head of the Land and Water Department. We thank
Yeah,
you so
thanks for
much for
having
being
us.
with us today. And of course, also with Chuck Wagner, who is the chairman of the Land and Water Committee of the Kewaunee County Board of Supervisors. Chuck, thank you very much
Thank
for,
you.
for joining us.
pleasure to be here.
today. Thank you both so
Yeah,
very
you're
much. That's going to do it for our program today for your city, your county, and we thank you so much for joining us.